Hey guys, HCGChica. I came on today to talk about a question that I've gotten several times actually, and it's a good question, and that is how do you know when you're on the right dose of HCG? How should you feel when you're on HCG and you're on a good dose? So I just want to kind of talk about it in a nutshell first, and then I'm going to expand a little bit. Basically, aside from the first few days of the low calorie part of the diet, we're going to talk about that in a minute. But aside from that, for most of the protocol, while you're on the low calorie part, you in general should not be hungry most of the day. However, at meal times like lunch and dinner time, say noon and 6 o'clock, something like that, it is normal to be hungry and to need to eat. That's why on the diet we are taking in 500 calories. So that is part of it. We are going to need to eat something. So it is normal to be hungry at those times. So just because you do get hungry a couple of times throughout the day, if it's time to eat your meal, that's totally fine. That doesn't mean you're on the wrong dose. So the key is that when you do get hungry and then you eat your, tiny little mouse meal of 200 or 250 calories, when you complete eating it, you should feel satisfied. You're not going to be full, but you should be no longer hungry and you shouldn't need to eat again for another several hours. So in general, that's about how you should feel. Most of the day not hungry. Hungry at meal times, you'll get even more hungry if you wait too long to have one of your meals. But then when you eat it, you should, feel like you're no longer hungry. So that's how it should feel. Now I wanted to talk about the first few days of the diet. In general, it is normal to be hungrier the first few days. So it's harder to tell sometimes if you're on the right dose or not in those first few days, because even if you are on the right dose of HCG, you may be hungry. And I want to talk about a couple of the reasons for that. When you do your loading, most people, for the most part, I think load just eating whatever, right? And so what that means is, in addition to eating higher fat foods, you're also probably having a high carb diet for those 2 or 3 days that you're loading. And I don't know if you guys have noticed this, but if you eat a lot of high carbs for a couple days or even one night, say you ate a lot of carbs one night, just, not on HCG, just regular life, you ate like a ton of pasta or something and you got really full. And then the next morning you wake up and you're like starving. Have you guys ever had that happen to you? That's happened to me. And it's the weirdest feeling because you think that's so weird. I ate so much more than I usually eat late last night and I woke up way hungrier than usual. That just doesn't make sense, right? So when you load with with just not clean and you load just regular, which is totally fine. It's not like you have to load clean or low carb. When you load regular, you may be hungrier in those first few days because of that drastic change from having a bunch of carbs and all of a sudden just cutting your body off of those carbs right away. And I wanted to read you just a couple snippets of things, just interesting stuff I had read online regarding that, about like why that happens. For instance, this is from pathmed.com. This, I think he's like a, naturopathic doctor or something. And he wrote a post and he talks about when you eat a meal that's high in carbs, he says this macronutrient suppresses the hunger hormone ghrelin quickly, causing you to feel satisfied just after eating. But it says simple carbs drive down ghrelin initially, but this hormone then rises within a few hours to above normal levels, causing you to feel even hungrier than when you started eating in the first place. So the ghrelin hormone, I don't know if I'm saying that right. That's actually, I think, the hormone that's responsible for when you get like growling pains in your stomach. So it's not necessarily an indication that you're truly hungry, but it's just one part of the picture. And it's saying that when you have high carb meals, that hormone is going to actually make you feel hungrier, more hungry than you would have been if you hadn't eaten that high carb meal. So that's one thing that happens. So And aside from that, I found a lot of posts from people talking about switching over to a low carb diet. When you first switch over to a low carb diet, those first 3 or 4 days, everyone usually recognizes are the hardest. And the reason for that, again, is it's like you're going through carb withdrawal. You know, you had all these carbs, and all of a sudden your body's without, and it has to make an adjustment, and it's craving those carbs, and it's not getting any. And so you're feeling hungry. Having a higher fat diet makes that easier to get through that, but of course on hCG you're not having fat in your diet. So, and not only that, you're only eating 500 calories. So it is normal the first few days of hCG, especially if you have loaded the traditional way, which is just to eat whatever, you know, pizza, cookies, whatever, to be hungry those first few days. I do remember my first round. I think it was about 3 o'clock, and I was at the grocery store, and it was my first day on VLCD, and I was hungry. I was really hungry, and I'm like staring at all the piles of produce as I walk, and I almost felt like I was in a daze, you know, just like, oh, wow, I'm so hungry, and I can't eat any of this, and, you know, it was a bit tough. But, you know, after the first few days, that passed, and I wasn't hungry anymore. And then I just had my 2 little meals each day, and I felt fine the rest of the day. So, so when you start the low-calorie part of the diet, do give yourself a few days on it before you start messing with your dose too much, because that may just be what was going to happen anyway. Now, additionally, if you do choose to load clean or low carb, that is what I do now. I eat high fat, high protein, and I stay away from sugar and grain and carbs. I don't even have fruit when I load anymore. You don't have to do this. I'm not saying it's the best thing to do. I just something I've chosen to do. And I find that I'm not as hungry those first few days because I'm not making a huge carb transition as I would have been if I had loaded the traditional way. And also, I do a low carb week before I start loading now. So by the time I'm loading and by the time I start the low calorie part of the diet, I'm basically at the point where all those carbs have already cleared my system. My body has already adjusted to no longer having carbs. So it's a little bit of an easier adjustment. However, you know, I was still a little teeny bit hungry, I think, on the second day, but nothing at all like the first couple rounds when I loaded dirty or loaded clean. I mean, loaded traditionally. So, so anyway, I just hope that helps you kind of figure out, if you're loading regularly, give yourself those first few days, and unless you're like totally ravenous all day long, you know, but if you're hungry at different points, just, it's okay. It's probably going to pass. After those 3-4 days, if you're not finding yourself less hungry, then you might want to start thinking about adjusting your dose. As far as what normal doses are for people, you know, I think in general, most people, if you're like, say, injecting hCG, most people inject anywhere between 125 IU up to 175 IU. I think on rare occasions, people might even dose as high as 200, but I think that's pretty rare. 150 IU was about the dose that everyone was taking when I originally started this protocol back in 2011, and it seemed like that worked well for most people. I originally started with 175 IUs, and then I had to drop it to about 165 IUs about 10 days into my first round. So that dose ended up technically being too high for me. I think I probably could have even started lower to start with. So 150 IUs is a good start point, I would think. It's not a fact. I'm just kind of throwing that out there from all the different people that I've watched on YouTube and my own experience. As you lose weight and get smaller, most likely you will have to reduce your dose. I've seen this with myself, and I've seen this with a lot of other people as well on YouTube. I currently take 125 IUs. That's pretty much the minimum dose. That's the dose that Dr. Simeon's injected into people intramuscularly. And originally the idea behind injecting 150 IUs, a little bit more, these days was because we're injecting subcutaneously into the fat instead of into the muscle. So I guess they were thinking you needed a little bit more since you weren't injecting it so deep. However, I'm feeling great now at 125 IU, and I'm finding a lot of other people are taking that dose these days as well and feeling good. So, just try it out. Start with what you feel comfortable with. If you were to start at 125 and you felt really hungry, that would be an easy fix as far as you would know that you needed to increase your dose, because really you wouldn't need to go below that in general. I think there's a couple people who've needed a teeny bit less, but in general you would know, okay, I need a little more. If you start at 150 and after those first few days you're feeling really hungry, you may need to decrease or you may need to increase. So you're going to kind of have to think that out. Once you've been on the protocol for a little while and the HCG is kind of going strong in your system, one possible way of testing whether you need more or less HCG, say you've been feeling fine on the protocol for a couple weeks and all of a sudden you're starting to feel more hungry. Once you've checked that your HCG is viable with a pregnancy test and all that, one thing that you can try doing is skipping a dose for a day. If you're doing a long round, you're supposed to be skipping 1 shot a week anyway, so you can skip a dose. And I guess the idea is if you feel more hungry or less hungry that day, you're supposed to kind of gauge that. And then based on that, you can kind of figure out, like, oh, I'm more hungry on my no-shot day. Well, that probably means that you need more HCG, right? Or if you're less hungry on your no-shot day, then you probably need a slightly smaller dose of HCG. So those are just some tips that I've picked up along my research on the forums and, stuff like that. I've tried those out on my mom, and because definitely you don't want to be hungry on hCG. It's not normal, it's not necessary, and it makes sticking to the diet, to me, almost impossible. So it's not about willpower here, people. It's about the hCG is supposed to make this diet fairly comfortable to an extent. Of course, we're all going to have emotional reasons for eating and social reasons for wanting to eat. That's not going to go away, of course. But the actual physical aspect of it should be fairly easy. I've been eating right now 300 to 400 calories a day, only eating when I'm hungry. I'm not hungry almost most of the day, and I feel totally normal. I am working, I'm taking care of my son, so you should be able to do your daily activities. So anyway, I hope that helps. Let me know if you have any more questions that I can answer, but I just thought I'd throw that out there just to give everybody kind of a good idea of what to expect the first few days and the rest of the protocol, and just how to figure out if you're on that proper dose of hCG. All right, talk to you guys later. Bye.